Okay, so at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter for this evening. Josh Schreiner has a Master of Divinity degree and has worked as a hospice chaplain for 6 months. Previously, Josh served as a hospital chaplain for 2 years while completing 4.5 units of clinical pastoral education. He also has served as a pastor for 10 years. Josh currently resides in Westfield, Indiana with his wife and 2 daughters. During his free time, he enjoys fishing, hiking, and being outdoors with his family. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, tonight we're going to be looking at the ABCs of healthy grieving. And our plan this evening is to understand what's happening when we grieve, to explore the different stages of grief, to talk about what helps and what doesn't help, to consider ways that we can help ourselves holistically, body, mind, and spirit as we grieve. And so first off, what is grief? The Oxford Dictionary defines grief as deep sorrow, especially that which is caused by someone's death. The experience of deep loss, especially of one with whom a deep bond is formed. And so no matter how you define grief, grief simply hurts. It's a natural response to loss. And we grieve throughout our lives. We grieve anytime we experience a major change in our life, whether that's a good change or a bad change. Some examples of good changes are being promoted to a new grade in school, graduating from high school, moving to a new home, getting married and leaving your past home, even the birth of a new baby. There's changes, and we can grieve life as it used to be. And when I think back to my life, I can remember even in middle school and in high school that those good changes when I went to a new school or when I went off to college, there was, even in those good experiences, grief. I missed the relationships I had in high school when I went to college, or I missed the teachers I had in middle school when I went to high school. And so throughout our life, anytime we are in transition, we are actually also grieving the loss of something that we're leaving. Grief also involves painful losses like the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, separation or divorce, the loss or limitation of our health, a broken friendship, and the loss of a beloved pet. These things that are painful are sources of grief to us. They hurt when any of these things happen. These are major things that can happen in our life that we grieve. And during the pandemic, we are grieving quite a bit. We've lost the normalcy of everyday life, the things that we used to be able to get out and do with family and friends, we may not be able to do, and so we might be feeling isolated. Our favorite activities might be limited, whether that's going out and playing sports or shopping or doing things that we typically do. They're changing, and that can be something we're grieving. It's riskier to get together, and that change in how we do that is a transition. School, work, social events, everything is different. And what makes this time even more difficult is we don't know when this will end or how soon or whether life will return to normal. And grief is an adjustment. It's a period of time that we adjust to a change in our life. It's a time of healing that involves painful emotions as we experience and adjust to our loss. Feelings of grief can include things like deep sadness or sorrow, anxiety, anger, hopelessness, depression, lethargy, yearning, or isolation. Grief helps us express and release our pain as we begin to adjust to our loss. And so grief isn't a bad thing. It's a period of time that we heal and we adjust to life without that which we lost. And when someone we love dies, when we lose somebody, the first days, the early days can be a blur characterized by numbness. We might feel like we're on autopilot, going through the motions. And life can lose its color. We might lose our energy, might not want to be out and socializing. We might want to stay at home. And it's possible to feel angry or fearful during this time. And in short, our hearts are broken by our loss, and we need time, and we need to give ourselves kindness and receive kindness as we heal. And grief is not a short-term process. There's a long road to healing. The old understanding was that it was likened to a physical injury, where over time you'd heal up good as new. But if you've walked through grief, you know that's not the case. It's not, I'm as good as new. But there is a new normal that arrives, that we adjust to life with this loss of ours. And that comes eventually. That comes with a sense of acceptance of our loss, and that takes time. It's not instant, it takes a process. And our relationship with our loved one continues, whether they are here or not. So today, researchers know that there are 2 stages to every loss, at least 2. The first one is the acute stage, and the second is the subtle stage. These are the 2 stages of every loss. And we're living through the acute stage in the first weeks following a major loss. And this is when grief is at its worst. We have really high highs and really low lows, like a roller coaster. And subtle grief is the period when we're learning to live with our loss. We're finding ways to help ourselves, to support ourselves. We're beginning to live our lives again. So some signs of acute grief, this first stage, is we experience a roller coaster of emotions, the high highs, the low lows. And grief storms can come at unexpected moments. Grief can be just overwhelming and just hit us unexpectedly. And even though we know that grief storms will come, and we know that that is the case, even still they can overwhelm us. And when we get in that place where we're having a grief storm, it could be triggered by smells, by songs, by places we are in, and more. Things that are connected to our loved one. Even just the smell of their perfume or cologne walking through a store can just trigger a grief storm, or things like that, or a favorite song that was their favorite, or a place that you find yourself in that reminds you of that loved one. We may be forgetful during this time, irritable. We may not feel like we fit in with groups we used to find comfortable. And it's good to recognize this in yourself, that this is normal. And if you're caring for someone who's grieving, give them extra grace and acceptance and kindness during this time. And memories we think about are often painful or connected to the last weeks of our loved one's life. So the memories are more painful during this stage of grief. Now here's the second stage. Subtle grief looks like this. We still have sad days, but they're not as often. More often than not, there are sweet memories instead of painful, sad ones. And we've learned what helps us feel better. And we've tried things to help us know what to do when we're down. We can navigate that when we're feeling down. We have resources that we've found helpful to us to help support ourselves. And we've built a social support system of friends who understand us, or a group we like. And so we have resources available during this time that we've, in this transition, been able to support ourselves. And like I said earlier, the memories we go to in our minds are often more happy and sweet than they are sad. And the lows aren't as low, and they're shorter in duration. So when those low times hit, they're not as low as the acute stage, and they're shorter in duration. The landscape of grief is that it can take every individual a different amount of time to process. It could take typically 10 to 12 weeks to go through the acute stage of grief, and it could begin to lighten after that, but everybody's different. The subtle stage of grief could continue on indefinitely. It could get lighter and easier over time. It's just everybody's journey with grief is unique to them. So some people feel much better at 6 months. Some others need to get through all the holidays and then they're better, while others still feel year 2 is a bit harder than year 1. And so as we see, grief is not linear. It's not like everybody follows the same path. We all follow our own path. And grief in this way, it doesn't make sense. It's not rational. There's more than one way to journey through it, and everybody's journey is unique. And so there are tasks that we can identify that can be helpful as we grieve. J. William Worden is a psychotherapist and a grief researcher, and he believes healthy grieving includes 4 important tasks. First is to accept the reality of the loss. The second is to feel the emotions of that loss. The third is to adjust to the reality of life without our loved one. The fourth is to find an ongoing relationship with that loved one that feels right to us. So the first task is to accept the reality of the loss. That sounds simple, but it isn't. To recognize this loss takes time because our brains, on one hand, know we've experienced loss. Rationally, we can understand that. But in our heart, it takes us longer to accept it. It takes us longer to accept it as we journey through feeling the feelings and that come with grief and being able to really recognize our loss for what it is and accept it. So what helps with acceptance is time, talking, creative expression, and gentleness. Let me go back real quick. I heard someone once say that a grieving person needs to tell his or her story at least 150 times before he or she can begin to heal. And so as that accepting the reality of the loss takes time, what's helpful in that is to have somebody you can tell your story to. Or if you're trying to, if you're a caregiver, you're wanting to support someone who's grieving, being there to listen is important, as we'll continue to see. So the second task to healthy grieving is feeling the emotions. And this task is one that few of us have a choice about. The tears, the anger, the worry, even the tender happiness and gratitude are all connected to our loss. And when we're feeling overwhelmed with emotion, it can help to put these feelings into physical action by taking a walk, exercising, doing stretches, simple stretches, or just breathing deeply. And the third task is to adjust to a new normal without our loved one. And this means to engage life without our loved ones. And this could begin right away when you have to make funeral arrangements or settle financial affairs. It could continue on as you do the things that you like to do, as you eat the foods you want to eat and enjoy the people you want to be around and go to the places that you want to go. That's adjusting to the new normal without your loved one. But as you do that, you find that it's not as scary as you might think, that you're not doing it without them, but you're actually taking them along with you. You're adjusting your relationship with them as you adjust to your new life. So the fourth task is adjusting our relationship with our loved one. Our relationship does continue, and how it continues will depend on what we think happens after death. For some, we may focus on carrying on our loved one's legacy, like caring about the values and the beliefs that they hold dear or the interests they hold dear, maybe volunteering at an organization that was important to them or doing a hobby that you shared with them, like gardening. Another way we might adjust our relationship with them is continue to talk to our loved one and feel them around us. So talking to them like they're in the room and feeling their presence. Another way we might adjust to our relationship with a loved one is to see and discern the little signs around us that might remind us of them, that they're still there. Whether that's a cardinal at the bird feeder and seeing that day after day, or finding pennies everywhere, or hearing their favorite song on the radio. These little things, these signs might remind us that our loved one's still with us. Still others may see at one point being reunited with their loved one after this life, and they might be connecting with their loved one through prayer and through their faith. As they talk to God, they might talk to their loved one. So what helps and what doesn't? A few rules about grief. There's no timeline to it. As I mentioned, everybody journeys through it in their own way. And so the time isn't as important as grieving in a healthy way, journeying through those 4 ways that we just identified to help us grieve in a healthy way. Every loss is unique, so no 2 people grieve the same way. Each new loss can bring up grief from previous losses. And then grief can affect us physically too, which can be surprising, that you can have a physical effect of having aches or sleeplessness, or even illness down the road if that continues. So what helps when we're grieving? The first and foremost thing we need to do is give ourselves permission to grieve, to be kind to ourselves and accepting of our place to do that, to be able to express our emotions and be able to begin to accept this loss. A sense of acceptance, as I mentioned, to be heard and to understood is helpful. Having somebody who's not there to give all the answers, but simply to listen, to give us a sense of understanding and compassion, and to offer to be with us, not to fix us, but to be with us. And practical supports help, like running errands or sharing meals, doing household tasks. Someone to cry with or talk with is important. Encouragement to grieve in our own way helps. And so there's some practical things that we can do to support those who are grieving, like I identified running errands, doing projects for them around the house, or sharing meals with them. Then there's relational things that are important, like just simply being with them, being there to listen, to hear the stories of the loved one that was lost. What doesn't help as we grieve is to be rushed to the good news too quickly, that this will get better in such and such amount of time, or something like that. That doesn't help. Platitudes or pat answers don't help. Any hints that we aren't grieving right, that doesn't help either. A sense of failure doesn't help in that regard. To feel pressured into acting happier than we feel doesn't help. We shouldn't have to pretend to be any different than the way that we feel and what we're thinking. To be expected to follow someone else's timeline doesn't help. Because like we talked about earlier, everybody's timeline is different. So here's why happy faces don't work. Grief is authentic, real, and painful. And when we hide our grief, it can make others feel better. We're just putting on a mask. And that can increase our sense of isolation, because we're not really being who we are. We're not showing who we are. We're hiding. And that can compound our suffering as we're isolating ourselves from others. And we could be even journeying deeper into our grief in an unhealthy way. So in finding support, find the support that fits you best. It could be a friend who's been through a loss and understands. I've talked with one person who they find it really helpful to walk with a friend of theirs who lost someone, and they share memories together and they talk about their loss, and that's helpful. For others, a grief group could be helpful. And at Suburban Hospice, we have an online Zoom grief group each Friday morning. And so feel free to contact Suburban Hospice if you would like more information about that. You can ask for me, Josh Schreiner, and I can share the details and send you a link. Local churches can be a help in finding support. Or a support group online. You could talk to your doctor or pastor about finding support or have a grief counseling referral. And the key in all this is togetherness. Togetherness is the isolation antidote. So there's a difference between suffering and pain. When we are grieving, we are suffering. We are suffering because we are isolated in our loss until we begin to share that with others. And when we join ourselves with another and share the stories and share the memories and share our feelings of grief, our suffering actually lessens to pain, because now it's not just on the inside, but we've brought it out and it's lessened. There's actually a biological change that happens when we do this. Research at the University of Texas shows that there's an instant release of endorphins that calms our system in a time where we are emotionally upset. And so that is what happens. That biological change happens as we are together with another and sharing, and the other is listening and being with us. So one listening, trusting friend can make all the difference. And so if you're looking to make a difference in someone's life who's grieving as you're listening to this, maybe one takeaway for you is just to be a sounding board, to be somebody who journeys with someone in their pain and show kindness by just being with, being compassionate, being there to listen. So here are the ABCs of care as we grieve. A prescription for healthy grieving begins when we feel our feelings, we're able to name them. One thing I found helpful when I started to try to do this in my own life for just self-improvement was just getting a feeling chart. If you Google just a feeling chart online, has different emojis, you can maybe just ask yourself once a day, how do I feel? And be able to, identify one feeling and then journal it and say why, or talk about it out loud to yourself and say why. That can help. Having somebody to talk to helps about the way we feel. Being able to identify where we are in the 4 tasks of grief helps. And be gentle and accepting of ourselves, not rushing ourselves, but taking time to grieve in a healthy way, journeying through those 4 tasks. Next, recognize how grief is affecting us physically, that it does have a physical effect on us. And then find a way that's healthy to express and work with our feelings of loss. And so here's some ideas to work with grief. The first is just speaking out loud to our loved one, talking to them. The next is writing letters or journaling to our loved one. Painting or coloring can help, just expressing our creative side. And then being out and getting physical exercise, whether that's at the gym or taking a walk, doing a project where you're building or gardening, doing something that gets you outside or moving about can help. Prayer and meditation can help. And as you pray, maybe one thing you can try doing is just to express to God that those feelings that you have towards your loved one, or talking to God about your loved one if faith is important to you. And the book of Psalms can be a tremendous resource, as there virtually is every feeling that you could ever feel in the Psalms, as the psalmists throughout the Psalms cry out to God. Meditation can help, taking time to be still. And in order to do that, a couple things to keep in mind. You could just simply anchor yourself in the present moment by focusing on your breathing and letting that take your attention. Or you can focus on your heartbeat and just spend 5 minutes being still. And if you haven't done it before, maybe you just take a minute, and then after a week, maybe 2 minutes, and just build yourself up where you can practice being still and meditating. Carrying on your loved one's legacy can be a way you work with grief, whether that's volunteering at a place they used to volunteer at, or carrying on a hobby they used to do. So grief in our bodies are often the last thing on our minds as we grieve, but they are impacted. And grief can take a toll on us physically. And so we might feel body aches, we might feel shortness of breath, tightness in our chest, and even symptoms like our loved one experienced. And after a time of crisis, we might even get sick ourselves as our immune system crashes. That's why self-care is very important. Eating regularly and well, getting enough sleep, staying hydrated, finding support, all these things can go a long way toward helping us stay healthy. And mindfulness can be helpful as we grieve, where we're just present to the moment, noticing the here and now. Mindfulness can help us remember that this too shall pass. Mindfulness can, some techniques we can use is just being aware and attuned to how our body feels, to just focus on our senses, or simply to breathe deeply, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes that we need extra support can include holidays, anniversaries, such as the day you met, or the day that you were married, or the day that you parted, birthdays and other family milestones like graduations, births, promotions, and others, weddings, the change of seasons. And if you're looking to support someone as they grieve, you might just be aware of these days and the life of that person that you want to show kindness and love to, who's grieving, and reach out to them and check in on them during these times. And you know you're feeling better when you begin to feel interested in doing things again. You get out of the house and you're wanting to try new things. You have a little bit more energy and you have more of a desire to get involved in things. And you can feel grateful again. You look on life with more, you look back at life with more gratitude. Your alone time doesn't hurt as much. Mood swings are easier to manage. And so thank you for your time and for listening. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you're found ways that you can grieve in a healthy way and find ways you can support those grieving in your life in a way that shows them healing and kindness. Thanks.